everybody, and welcome to MarkWHO77. Yes, MarkWHO77, the show that's done in conjunction with MarkWHO42 and the 77 publications. We interview British comic creators who all have a connection with the 77, at least for now. And we've got a great show for you today, but let me introduce everyone. Vicky Jakubowski.
Hi.
And the editor-in-chief of the 77 publications, Ben Cullis.
Hello there.
So we've got a great show today. This is the first time we've had 3 people that we're interviewing at the same time. So this is going to be fun. We're going to get a lot of information from them. And Ben, why don't you tell us who they are?
Sure. We have the author and renowned psychologist, Laurence, Alison, who works at Liverpool University as day job and has other fingers in pies that we'll be happy to talk about, I'm sure. We have the artists. We have Steve Austin, primarily known for Judge Dredd with Rebellion, appeared in issue 1 of the 77 with a strip called Angel. And we have Paul McCaffrey, who's done a cover for us for This Comic is Haunted and some interior work as well, and is probably best known really for his Doctor Who covers and work.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Doctor Who, that's my specialty. Woohoo! All right. So without further ado, let's bring them on. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing? All right.
Hi. It's nice to meet you guys.
You too.
Yes, good to meet you too, Mark.
Thanks. Let me start with I'm going to start with the first question because, my show. No. It is probably the hardest question we ask. In fact, it is the hardest. Everything after that is easy peasy, but this one is hard. And I'm going to ask it of all 3 of you, starting with Stephen, then Paul, and then Laurence. Okay, here's my question. Who is Steve Austin? Besides the Bionic Man. Besides Bionic Man.
Or Stone Cold.
Yeah, or oh yes.
Or Stone Cold, yeah.
Oh.
Well, I grew up in London, and I now live in Cambridge. I worked in management for quite a while, in fitness and leisure management. And then when I hit about 40, I decided that I just didn't want to do that anymore, and started making a move towards getting into illustration, comics, etc. I've always read comics, always drawn, and then started submitting to 2000 AD whilst I was working for free on a number of small press just to try and hone my skills. And after about 6 submissions and rejections, I eventually got my foot in the door, and so I've been doing it ever since. So for about 5 years now, working for 2000 AD. I do some storyboard work as well, and commissions and some other illustration work. So that's me.
All right, that's great. Paul, who are you?
Last year, I saw myself described as a reasonably well-known comic book artist. So, yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. My background's kind of mainstream illustration, but I've always been a sort of comic book fan. And I've kind of gradually sort of moved towards comics. But I kind of feel as though I'm kind of constantly hovering on the edge. But I don't mind, some of the more interesting projects are the ones that are kind of hovering around the edge as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. And now, Laurence, who are you?
A long time comics fan. Never worked in comics until actually started kind of during the pandemic. I'm actually a psychologist by trade. I'm a forensic psychologist, but like the other guys, I've been into comic books for many, many years. And Paul may be a reasonably well-known comic artist. I'm a completely unknown comic writer. So that's me.
Not anymore.
Probably not for much longer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're known. You've just told everyone in the world who you are. You're known. You're on MarkWHO77. Okay, I have another question, again, for all of you. What comics did you grow up reading? How did they develop your passions for creating them? We'll go with Laurence this time.
Yeah, well, I think 4 phases, I guess. Like some of the I listened to your show actually this morning. I listened to the Andrew Sawyer's interview to get a bit of a sense of it. So Yeah, I mean, I was a big Whizzer and Chips monster fan. Loved the Leo Baxendale stuff. Loved Ken Reed. Fell in love with the Frankie Steen work that he used to do many years ago. Then I did get issue 1 of 2000 AD. I was there at the very beginning. My mum used to give me a copy of the issue after I'd been trying to practice violin with this god-awful teacher called Bellinger, who I loathed. But 2000 AD was my treat at the end of it. Big fan of Bellardinelli. Think he's massively underrated. Always loved Massimo's work. Bolland, McMahon, all the classics, Leach, Bisley, all that stuff. Kind of gave up on 2000 AD. I don't know, just before the kind of Bishop run on it, and then all the Marvel DC stuff, Frank Miller's stuff on Sin City, I loved. Alan Moore, Swamp Thing, Watchmen, all that kind of classic stuff, and then the sort of elevated comic art stuff, Chris Ware, Daniel Clowes, Charles Burns, Seth stuff. I mean, everything. I just voraciously get through it all. You know, I'm very lucky. I have a very tolerant wife that allows me to keep buying this stuff and flooding the shelves with it. So yeah, long-term comics fan and love it all. Love it all. Loads of stuff I like. Yeah.
And so how did they develop your passion for creating comics?
Well, I mean, like I say, I mean, I guess 2000 AD was the big influence. I just loved the mind-blowing imagination of it, the sort of madness of it, the variation of it. You know, that, you know, with many of the other guys, I'm sure it's true as well. Just some of these images are completely etched onto my back of my mind, drilled in there. I mean, like Pat Mills, I went to a very Catholic school as well. The De La Salle brothers were there, and you know, I've talked at some length with Pat about that experience. But you know, it sharpens your hatred of authority, and 2000 AD was very good at being the whetstone that allowed that sharpening. I think just the imagination of it, and the, you know, the digs at authority, I guess I liked as well. But the wildness of it, the punkness of it, the variation of it, and the madness of it, it just always appealed to me. And actually, I mean, I think it's the thing we've lost a little bit of, the throwaway nature of it. You know, when comics get too elevated and you're sort of putting them in those weird plastic things that you never look at, that doesn't quite do it for me. And I've always, you know, I just think the artistry in it is phenomenal, but it's not showy, it's not elevated, and I just like that kind of throwaway, pulpy, trashy quality to it. So yeah.
All right,
does that answer the question, Mark?
Yeah. Paul, what comics did you read growing up, and how did they influence your creation of comics?
Right, well, I suppose it started off with Marvel and DC. Whatever comics I could pick up at our local newsagent or news store, as perhaps you describe it. Yeah, back then there were no comic shops, specialist comic shops, so you bought whatever you could, whenever you could, and you know, it's whatever had a cool cover. You might not read the follow-up issue, you might not have read the issue preceding it, but that was where sort of my love of comics started. Then in, I think it was 1972, Marvel UK started reprinting Spider-Man, Hulk, Fantastic Four, and Mighty World of Marvel, and I think that was a real kind of eye-opener for me. 2000 AD was a big influence on me, I have to say. And it's interesting, Laurence, what you were saying about the kind of anti-establishment stance. It was, you know, Pat Mills in his Slain stories, where the forces of order, they were the bad guys. And that was the first time I'd kind of come across the idea that, you know, the forces of chaos were actually the good guys. Anarchy was a positive thing. But yeah, 2000 AD was a big influence. I was very into a lot of the black and white horror comics that Marvel were publishing in the early 70s. Some fantastic art there. Vampire Tales, Dracula Lives, Monsters Unleashed.
Yeah,
I loved all of those. Yeah, sort of growing up, I sort of drifted away from comics. Did a graphic design course and kind of discovered people like Egon Schiele, Ralph Steadman, Francis Bacon. They were sort of influences for a while. But then I kind of discovered things like Warrior, which was full of some fantastic stuff. V for Vendetta, as you probably know.
Yeah.
How comics influenced me? To be honest, I never really wanted to draw comics. I was always kind of slightly wary of getting involved. So I kind of did a graphic design course, illustration. It was kind of mainstream illustration, but eventually the sort of the desire to draw comics kind of won through, and I kind of stumbled into it more than kind of made a beeline for anything. I mean, I sent samples to 2000 AD and got nowhere. But yeah, that's me and comics.
All right, thank you for that. Steve, same two questions.
Well, I'm a child of the 80s, so I started reading comics in the 80s, and I can't remember the timeline, but I was reading. I used to read the cartoony, like the Beano, Whoopi, Buster, 2000 AD, Eagle. I used to get them all, and then I also was quite big into Marvel American comics as well. So I just basically used to. I mean, that's how I learned to draw. Really, well, draw comics was just through copying them. So I used to copy, all of the issues. And as an artist, the visuals always overtook the storyline. So if I didn't like the art, then I wouldn't read comics. So yeah, I used to go to being in London in the 80s. That's when sort of specialist shops were sort of quite rife. So I used to go to World's End near Chelsea and go to Quality Comics, which is run by Dear Skin at the time, but I didn't know who he was at the time. But I used to go in there and on a weekly basis and pick up a bunch of Spider-Man, X-Men, New Defenders, and all sorts of varieties. So yeah. But that's how it influenced my comics, was just through copying them. I think an artist's style is just a culmination of failures to draw like your heroes. So that was it. I sort of copied Bolland and Steve Dillon and Jose Ortiz. They're some of my favorites. So I think you'll probably see sort of bits and pieces of those in my style.
All right. I'm going to let Vicky ask the next question. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I have a question for Laurence, because I don't normally talk about my day job on this show, but our day jobs actually cross over because I work in law enforcement on the West Coast of the U.S. And,
right.
And so it was just when I was reading your bio, and it was just really weird because I have a child advocacy center that I run and work in law enforcement, and I grew up military. And so much of what I was reading about you, and then I was looking at some of your work, and I was wondering how much of what you do in your normal life influences your story life. Because I know for me, some of my creative life is influenced by my day life. So I was just curious, what does that do for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a massive influence on it. When you're writing something, you're writing hopefully something that is meaningful to you, that you have something to say without it being preachy or didactic or too rammed down people's throats. But yeah, I mean, and you all know this, Vicky, the experiences that you've had working with the military, some will have been, incredibly positive, a lot of heroism and, remarkable behavior, almost superhuman behavior, great acts of heroism, sacrifice and altruism. Same in law enforcement as well. But equally, you've probably come across some pretty painful, awful stuff. And so, those highs and lows, I mean, I've had a 30-year career in this. I've been doing this probably too long, but, it's bound to sort of seep into what you do, even if I think if you're too mindful of it, too conscious of it, it probably doesn't work terribly well if you're forcing it in. But I mean, for me, when I'm writing something, I'm trying to solve a problem. How is this going to start, how is it going to proceed, and how is it going to end, and how am I going to have a villain that's difficult to overcome, and how's the person going to win, and how's it going to be resolved? So it's problem solving principally, but I think unconsciously all of you is in it somewhere. It's quite surprising and unnerving sometimes what comes out, perhaps, when you've actually written the thing down. Jesus, this theme keeps coming up, there's something unresolved there. But yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it. All of it bleeds in. I think if it's just there, it's ever present. I think.
Okay.
Well, I would ask that of Steve and Paul, but Steve, do you ever find that your real life, so-called real life, does it ever blend into your work? Do you ever find that something that has happened in your day life has blended into your art?
Maybe on a subconscious level, not consciously. No, not consciously. I mean, the only practical thing I can say is that my previous work in management means that I got quite good time management. I'm quite disciplined in getting stuck into work and seeing it through. But as far as what goes into my art, I'm sure there is, but nothing comes to mind. I mean, I've always quite liked the darker side, like whether it comes to movies or comics and art as well. So, I mean, that obviously has an influence on it. But specifics, no, probably not. Not that I'm aware of, anyway.
So, what about you, Paul?
Well, thankfully, there's nothing that's happened in my real life that's reflected in anything I've drawn. I probably wouldn't be here now if otherwise. But yeah, I think if you're honest, bits of yourself will ultimately feed through, even if it's just simply the imagery which you were drawn to. I mean, I suppose working with a script writer, everything's kind of a compromise. And, with working, Laurence writes the scripts, he has these images in his head, and it's up to people like me and Stephen to try and translate those to something two-dimensional. But there's going to be a lot lost in between. So it's going to be a bit of Laurence, it's going to be a bit of our own personal interests and obsessions and peccadillos that come through. And hopefully between us something interesting happens if we're doing our job right.
All right. This is, I guess, for all of you. Now we have you on. Part of the reason we have you on is because we're going to talk about WarFighter and the campaign that it's going to be on the 77 because it's being published by them. Can you tell me a little about the backstory, not just the story, but how the story came to be?
I was fortunate to, well, actually, I've been working with a guy called Nathan Smith in Coventry, who's a lovely chap. He's a young and up-and-coming academic, super guy. And he does a lot of work with the military, does a lot of work on resilience, stress, trauma training, And I actually saw on Twitter that he produced a comic. He does a lot of stuff in extreme environments, so people that are out doing meteorological experiments out in the Arctic, etc., or people that are on NASA and they're isolated for extended periods of time, all kinds of extreme kind of incidents. And he produced a small comic book for those people. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Really interesting that you've produced a comic on it. And he said, yeah, I'm a massive comic fan. And I'd known of Nathan for a while, and we got talking about things. I said, well, maybe we do something for our law enforcement and military colleagues. And he was given a Research Excellence Award for what he'd done with Coventry. And he said, yeah, let's do something on some of the themes that we were interested in for our military colleagues. And between him and me, I managed to find some. Basically, occasionally I do consultancy work for various different commissions or stuff like that, court work and rah. And so I put some of the money that I'd earned through that into it, and Nathan had put this Research Excellence Award, and we sort of had a bit of a jam session about what themes we wanted to cover in this comic book. And weirdly, at the same sort of time, I can't even remember why I decided to do this. When I was 14, I actually drew a comic strip for a very good friend of mine who's now sadly dead, a guy called Farron Short. I'm still very friendly with his brother, and Farron sadly died of cancer when he was very young, a couple of years ago. And there was the very first thing I ever drew. I spent hours and hours drawing the damn thing, and it was a strip called Atomic Crusader. And I said to Nathan, well, we could maybe reanimate this strip, which then became The Divided Saint. And I wrote a 36-page strip called The Divided Saint that was basically re-energizing this strip. And it was about the St. George legend, you know, a guy that if anyone knows the St. George legend, he was tortured and cut in half and molten lead poured into his eyes and all these god awful things that was done to him. And I thought it'd be a nice little allegorical story to talk about competing values in soldiers, in terms of being, on the one hand, compassionate one moment and then dehumanizing the enemy next, completing the mission, leaving no man behind. And also, you know, I've done a lot of psychological research on things like extreme decision making, augmented humans, post-traumatic stress recovery, So the first story was this story called The Divided Saint. And originally I wrote it all for a chap called David Hitchcock, who I've worked with at length. And for various reasons, he was only able to do the first issue. And I thought, God, who else am I going to get on board? And then I can't quite remember how I got hold of Stephen. And so I got hold of him. And I managed to get hold of Paul, and I managed to get hold of Warwick as well. So what was originally, you know, sort of David Hitchcock strip suddenly became this sort of carved up piece. And actually, I think it works really well. It reminds me of the kind of old 2000 AD stories where you get McMahon one week and then you get Bolland the next, two totally different artists that you would think, well, we can't have the same Cursed Earth story drawn by these totally different artists. But actually, it works so well. And, you know, Paul was talking about, you know, these things being a compromise. But what I think is interesting, and what I really love about doing comics, is the synergy that emerges between two people doing something together. So I've got a vision in my head, and because I do a bit of art as well, I sometimes visualize what it is that I've written. And all three of these guys, I mean, I cannot describe how outstanding the work is. It's absolutely phenomenal. So Paul, Warwick, and David drew The Divided Saint between the three of them. Then I had three other strips, and I was lucky enough to work with Stephen on those three. And they're between 5 and 7 pages each, all little self-contained stories. And they have very sort of more specific, coherent messages within them. So the Vitruvius story is very much about human augmentation. And that if you don't think about the psychological principles in augmentation, then things go horribly wrong. Then we've got a strip called War is Hell, about the intergenerational effects of being involved in conflict. And
I love that one. That's a great one.
Oh, that's very kind. And then the third one is Warrior in the Garden, which is about the effects of PTSD. And often, you know, we sort of think that they're more likely to be sort of inflicting wounds on yourself or suicide or stuff like that. Yeah. But actually, a lot of the impact of PTSD is violence on others. Oh, speaking of which, the cat just attacked me.
Who is your friend? Who's your friend there?
This is Hobo. He was in a terrible state when we picked him up. Actually, his teeth looked. I made the fatal mistake of putting my hand above his head.
Yeah,
he's been hit in the past, so but he's doing all right now. So yeah, he's occasionally a bit spicy, but he's all right. So yeah, that's a sort of very long-winded tale of how it came about. So
I love it.
Yeah, it's about pages. It's like I say, it's been a real privilege working with these guys, and Ben's been very kind and patient with me in putting the thing together. Hugely supportive, and big shout out to Ben for sort of navigating me through it, because I've got no idea really what I'm doing here, but he's been very tolerant of my ineptitude.
Yeah. All right. Ben, why don't you ask the next question?
I don't know what to say about that. I'm going to go back. So we are talking about WarFighter, but I'm just going to come back and go back to Steve, and I'm going to embarrass Steve. So the first strip I printed of yours was something called Angel.
Yeah, that was from originally printed in Rejected, wasn't it?
Was that quite an early piece then? Because we printed it, what, 3 odd years ago? And you're saying, was that prior to you doing your work with 2000?
I think it was. I can't quite remember. It was a long time. It was a long time between when I drew it and when it was published.
Yeah. Well, when Tharg's finished with you, we've got another Tharg that might want you to do something.
Okay.
So, and Paul, again, thanks so much. I mean, you know, we got an issue of Haunted, and Dave Healy is editing that, and yeah, magnificent work with Haunted.
Well, I was proud to be a part of issue 2. I mean, I really like what the 77 are doing. You know, it's kind of really revitalizing British comics. of that ilk, because there isn't actually a lot going on, really. There's a few humour comics, and then there's 2000 AD, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like there was nothing else really happening. And I got my initial break back in small press many years ago. You know, and I think I work with students at State University doing the cartoon and comic arts course, and I always emphasize you know, the small press as being a great way to get your work seen by people.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, last week's 2000 AD cover was by Lee Milmore, someone of our age, who his backstory is and Steve McManus has said this. He pitched for the next editor, and one thing another happened, and Lee couldn't fulfill the contracted work and wasn't able to do it. And 30 years passed, you know, and now he's back. So it's and I'm only saying this because he's done a few pages for us and felt on the basis of that then he would resubmit. And to start the show, we were talking with Steve here about submitting. And I wondered, Steve, that process. What do you think? What advice would you give to someone about submitting work then? Because you know, it's quite harrowing. You have to take rejection, don't you? You have to take.
Yeah, I mean, essentially every time you reject it, you think, right, that's it, no more. And you go away and you lick your wounds and you come back and you do it again, you know. And then the good thing with submitting to 2008 is you always get a little piece of advice back as well, a reason as to why, rationale as to why you weren't accepted. So it gives you something to go away and work on. But yeah, my advice would just be to be patient and you know, don't expect to get in first time. And if you sort of go in with that in mind, then you won't go wrong. Yeah, and just take on board what other artists tell you. So it's just the usual stuff, you know. Show your work to other artists, and I was showing mine to. I was lucky enough to meet Brian Bolland. He was working at when I was working in management before I left to go into comics. I was having an ahhing about whether to do it or not. And then one Christmas, one December, I was working covering the girls that I used to manage, who was the manager of the sports centre. She was off, so I was covering the sports centre, and I was chatting to one of the badminton team that used to come in every Thursday. And he happened to mention, I can't remember how the conversation started, but one of their badminton players was quite famous. So and this is in the arse end of nowhere. This is in a little village called Linton, which is about 10 miles from where I am here in rural Cambridgeshire. And he said, oh, he's a guy that draws comics, or he does comic strips. And I said, oh, what's his name? He said, it's Brian. I said, Brian who? And he said, Brian Bolland. And I nearly fell over. So I introduced myself to him and got chatting, and he was in every Thursday. So I'd come in the second week I came in. He brought in his A4 portfolio of all his roughs. I said, oh, I thought you might be interested to have a look through that. So I was just like sitting in the back office, just running through this folder of his A4 roughs, all the covers you can think of. And then he'd have a look at my work every Thursday and sort of comment on it before I submitted it. So that was nice.
Did you tell him where his backhand could be improved on the backgammon? Sorry, the badminton court.
He had a better backhand than me. So yeah, so it went on like that. And then I was drawing small press all the time, which, as Paul says, is invaluable. Getting your work seen and also just honing your skills, you know. Just getting used to working from script and working to deadline, and you know, the whole process. And it was actually one of the strips I drew for Zarjazz.
Yeah, that's Cal's Arena, I think.
Cal's Arena,
yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
Judge Wright's story. Yeah,
I submitted that because what I was doing before was submitting from these scripts. You can print off scripts from the 2000 AD website of the stories that were previously been printed, and I'd done all of those, and got rejected. So I sent the Cal's Arena in, and that was the one that Matt said, oh, I might have some work for you. And then I got my first Future Shock about a month later.
But it goes to show who reads it as well. Yeah, because John Wagner famously hired Dan Cornwell on the basis of the stuff he was doing, wasn't it?
Yeah, from Rock of the Reds. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is for you, Paul. Okay. Our show is called MarkWHO77, and so I have to ask this, and you can see why behind me. Our logo. You've done some work on Doctor Who comics.
Well, I did one cover.
Right, the third Doctor. Yeah, that was really good. But you know, you did the one cover, but you also did a Faction Paradox cover, which is
right.
technically Doctor Who.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and you did Andrew Cartmell's Rivers of London Black Mold issue 2, which technically our Andrew Cartmell is the script editor for Sylvester. So I'm going to throw that into Doctor Who. What is your love of Doctor Who, and who's your doctor?
John Pertwee, the third Doctor.
Yeah.
He's the one I grew up watching. And for me, he will always be my definitive Doctor. But having said that, I think David Tennant did a fantastic job when it was revitalized as well. A lot of those Pertwee stories were set in a Welsh quarry, but I always really enjoyed the stories that were set here on Earth with Unit and the Brigadier and all those characters.
Yeah.
I think it was a great period. I mean, people joke about it now, but yeah, that was my period, really.
Yeah.
Tom Baker, I thought, who is this buffoon when he first appeared? But after a couple of episodes, I really warmed to Tom Baker. I thought he was great.
Yeah.
He was my first.
He was mine.
Yeah.
He was my first.
First.
Yeah.
But no, that's cool. Vicky, why don't you take the next one?
Oh, well,
Put her on the spot.
See how you are. Well, we'll start with Steve. When did you first decide you wanted to be an artist? When did you first realize that art was something you wanted to do? Or did you come out of the womb scribbling?
I've always, I've drawn for as long as I can remember. I've always drawn. Probably any comic artist probably did the same thing. From when I could pick up a pencil, I was scribbling and drawing. And I used to do. My mum used to work at a library, and she used to bring home these reams of. You remember the old printer paper with the holes down the side? She used to bring piles at home, and I'd get through that in no time at all, just scribbling, just telling stories in my head and drawing. I don't think the drawings even made any sense, but I'd be sitting there doing the sound effects and scribbling stories. So I've always done it. But then, as I said before, the decision to actually take it seriously was when I was, I think, 41, something like that. I'm 51 now. When
you're young. You're
sorry?
young.
I am young. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Came at heart. And I just had enough of doing the work I was doing, and I got to that age where I was thinking, I can't be doing this in 10 years' time. And we just had our first little boy, and I wanted to sort of tell him as he gets older, your mindset changes. I want to be able to tell him as he gets older that you can, do what he wants, and if he works at it. But I couldn't tell him that doing a job that I hated. So it all culminated into me making the decision to take the art more seriously and get in and practice and start trying to get into it. So,
did you get encouragement when you were younger from anybody?
Yeah, everybody used to encourage me. Yeah. I mean, at school they were pushing me to do art, but at the time I wanted to do comics then. But it was you should go into graphic design, you should go into this and into that. And it didn't interest me. It sort of pushed me out. At that sort of time, I started to get into training as well. Like I used to bodybuild when I'm much younger. So I kind of veered off in that direction and got my qualifications and worked as a personal trainer and then worked as a fitness manager, etc., etc. But always drew on the side for fun. But yeah, I think school I just lost interest at school. So I didn't see it earlier on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Paul, you shared a little bit of your graphic design schooling, but when did you know that you wanted to be an artist, or did you also always think that you wanted to be an artist?
Well, I've as far back as I can remember, I've always drawn. I can remember watching Scooby-Doo every week and having a kind of visual checklist of the monster of the week.
Yeah.
I do think Hanna-Barbera, it might not show, but I think Hanna-Barbera, Flintstones, Scooby-Doo were a big influence on me. But yeah, at school, I just kind of drifted around, really. I never kind of had a sort of clear focus until got to the end of sixth form. And the head of sixth form wanted me to go for something more academic. I kind of thought, no, I think I want to draw pictures, but I didn't know what. So I ended up doing a foundation course, which over here, after you've done your A-levels, before you do a degree, foundation courses to sort of get you prepared for the next stage. And first term, I absolutely hated it. I thought, what the hell am I doing here? There were so many other people there, so much more talented, so much more focused, a real sense of direction. And I was thinking, yeah, I was completely lost. But then something clicked, and I suppose I've never looked back since then. But say, as regards drawing comics, no, I always thought they looked like a lot of hard work. And
yeah, it is.
Yeah, I realise that now, but I didn't realise just how much hard work they were. But I always remember one of my lecturers on foundation course saying that a lot of creativity comes about when people try to avoid doing work. So the creative process is trying to find easier ways of doing things. So maybe that was why I avoided comics for a long time. Plus, I always thought I wasn't really good enough, to be honest. You know, my heroes were people like Brian Boland, and I thought I'm never going to be able to draw like Brian Boland. And now I've been doing it a few years. I know for a fact I'll never be able to draw.
Isn't it funny? As a kid, you pick on Bob Bolland, and then as you get a bit older, you realise there are other artists you might be able to draw like, but certainly not.
Yeah. Again, it's a compromise between what you want to achieve, the artists that you really admire, who work in a style that you love, and kind of what you're able to do. I suppose music's a bit like that. You know, I sort of dabble in music as well. And, you know, in my head, I know the kind of music I want to create. And it sounds like all these other bands that I love. But what I ended up doing is something somewhere between the two. You know?
It goes back to what I was saying before, and that's exactly it. You just, I tried to draw like so many artists, and as Paul said, failed miserably. But you know, the fact that you try to draw like so many artists, you start to build up a base of different styles. That's, you know, little elements that maybe did come from that artist, and you end up with your own style.
But then there are going to be artists, budding artists, who see your work and think, "Oh, I want to draw like Stephen Austin now."
Yeah. I'm like, yeah.
And you don't realize that you are now the inspiration for the next generation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, Laurence, you know, you have been academic for a long time. At what point did you realize that you could tap back into your creative side?
Well, as I say, I hadn't done anything for years. And during the pandemic, we actually just set up a pretty daft WhatsApp group. I mean, you know, like these guys, I've drawn from a very early age. I love drawing. I'm not very good at it, but I like doing it. And we just set up a daft WhatsApp group, and every night, just as a semi-social thing, we pick a ridiculous thing to draw. Like tonight, you've got 10 minutes to draw a pop star from the 80s, or there's about 20 of us in this group, and it just re-energized my love of actually the process of drawing. I wasn't going to do anything with it, but I just enjoyed doing that. And at the same sort of time, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I have to do is scenario building to test people, whether they're being tested for an interrogation or they're being tested on their decision making. So part of what I spend a lot of time on actually is writing scenarios, terrorist related scenarios or disaster scenarios. So you have to write these imaginary worlds that people have to engage with, and we test their decision making. So, you know, and I quite enjoyed that creativity as well. And it all started during the pandemic. One of the very few good things that happened in the pandemic was it. You know, I mean, I spent a lot of time traveling, crazy amounts of time traveling, and I clawed some of that time back. So what became a little dabbling thing became a bit of an obsession, to be honest. You know, I've probably spent a bit too long doing it in the last year or so. But yeah.
Laurence, you mentioned that you do art. You like drawing. Which do you like better, writing or art?
That's very difficult to say. I mean, I can almost feel a different part of my brain working when I'm doing it, actually. I mean, I think I maybe find the art more relaxing in the sense, I mean, I'm not doing it in any way professionally or for it to even really be seen.
Right.
So I do find that a sort of semi-therapeutic pastime. I couldn't do what these guys do. I mean, some people have said, "Oh, well, maybe you could draw your own comics." Drawing a one-off illustration is so not like putting a comic page together. I've tried that, and I think it's fiendishly difficult. The composition, the storytelling, that it makes sense on the page. I mean, it's a whole different world from doing an illustration. I mean, I enjoy them both. I mean, people that have seen me on Facebook have seen this mad obsession that I have for drawing these sketch cards, which I had no idea what they were before Kickstarter came out. And I bought a pack of 100 of these fucking cards, and then spent hours having to get all 100 drawn for some bizarre reason. So my wife describes her as the small inked picture widow at the moment, because just ferret myself off and do a bit of drawing. Yeah, I mean, I like them both. Anything creative I've always enjoyed. And actually, being a scientist, I don't think being a scientist and being an artist are wholly different. To be a scientist, you have to use your imagination, and to be an artist, you have to be disciplined. So there is some overlap between the two things, I think. And well, I mean, I don't know how much you want me to divert on this story, but I had the great pleasure of interviewing a guy called Kevin Menez last year, who was one of the emergency room doctors that responded to the Las Vegas incident in the Stephen Paddock shooting. It was horrific. Quite remarkable young guy in his 30s. And I do a lot of work on curriculums and decision making and what makes for great decision makers. And he said a very interesting thing to me. I'd spent 8 hours interviewing him and his team. I mean, quite remarkable. And a very large number of people came into the car park at the hospital that he was working with horrific gunshot wounds, and a lot of them left, and they survived. They did a lot of things that were unusual to do as a decision maker, but were incredibly effective. Anyway, I spent 8 hours with him interviewing him about various things. He said, "Look, Laurence, I'm not very scholastically smart. I just about scratched through medical school." And he said, "I do think one of the things that made me a great decision maker on that night was my imagination, my creativity." And he said, "I spent a lot of time thinking about the worst case scenario before it had happened." And that sounds a bit morbid, but if you've been through that act of imagination in your head, then that is what's going to save you. And actually, I saw a little flask that he had. It had a beautifully painted key that had been transformed into a skull. And I said, "That's a really nice painting. Who did it? He did it." So, I think these overlapping qualities of what makes a great scientist or thinker is reinforced by using your imagination a lot. I think it's a very important feature. I'm not one of these scientists that says chuck all your money at the sciences and not the arts. They're both incredibly important elements, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Ben?
I got a bit virtuous there. I do apologize.
Well, I was just thinking.
I love that, because so often people think it's one or the other. And I've heard that so often. My first career was in the creative fields. My first career was on the stage, and then I got into finance. And it's just so funny because people are like, "Well, how do you do both? How can you do both? They have nothing to do with each other." And people always look at you like you weird. You can't be both analytical and creative. So it's so nice to hear someone else say that, because I think that they go hand in hand, and it's so nice to meet a group of people who all seem to think that. So, yay!
Well, that sort of binary thinking of there's this and there's this, and these are two separate camps. It's not very helpful. And like I say,
I don't think anything really progresses without imagination. You need somebody there to say, "What if?" And you've got to go through an imaginative process to imagine what if, what scenarios could come about, and what needs to be tested, what hypothesis needs to be put to the test. Yeah. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, all the elite. I mean, like I say, one of the things we do is speak to people that have made remarkably good decisions under severely adverse circumstances. They're odd people. They're unorthodox. They're eccentric. They're imaginative. They're people that don't really fit in, and they're not necessarily scholastically or academically smart. And again, Kevin said, if you've been taught the way to think, which is very procedural, if A, then do B, you know, when you're up against the wall and things don't look regular, you know, and critical incidents are defined by the fact that they're unusual, they're unique, you've not seen them before. Well, you know, if it's not in the policy book to deal with this massive fire because it's nothing you've seen before, or, you know, the horrific events that are going on in Hawaii at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What are you going to draw? You can't use your experience because you've never been there before. You
Right.
can't use a policy because it's not in there. So what have you got to use? You've got to use your creative brain to start rapidly solving problems. But like I say, oftentimes the best cops that I've met are odd, unorthodox, you know, off the wall people, strange people. So, you know, that's an important attribute, I think.
I think that's in so many cases, though, isn't it? You know, you can look, you said in critical situations, sports people, you're playing sports teams, critical situation of decision making about how you're going to change something, progressive, a move, or I don't know, someone who's on the front line in a violent situation. You know, exactly. How are you going to manage that situation, which you might not specifically had direct training to do with? So I've taught alongside. Or work with people who've retrained as teachers who invaded Iraq, you know, and they have a set of things which they can go back to. A lot of it is to do with sort of euphemisms about particular things that they say about each other and how you look at certain situations and how they define themselves differently than other people. But I don't think by that it means that you can do the same as them. You have to be in that situation and see whether you can do it. I think the publishing is quite the same, actually. I have to kind of like, I have to have that notion of what would be the worst situation to happen. And, you know, sometimes I kind of have to fill in with something or do something else or be creative about trying to solve a problem. So, you know, it was, Steve mentioned something earlier about being around the periphery or around the sort of like the environment of the small press. And I feel like I'm hoovering around the small press. You know? I'm kind of like seeing who's available or who might be interested. And if you don't ask, you don't get sometimes. And it doesn't have to be small press, you know. You know, I don't know, Laurence, was it my output that brought you to me? Because I wasn't, you know, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I saw you at Thought Bubble, and
you sat down and started drawing.
I did, yeah. I was asked to draw. I got one of the oddest requests, which was there was a lady that wanted Winnie the Pooh in various different situations, and she asked,
was it slain Winnie the Pooh or a dread
slain Winnie the Pooh? It was.
Yeah, slain Winnie the Pooh.
Nice enough out of slain Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, I mean, and like point out, you know that what you've done with the 77, you know, it's got the nostalgia to it as well, but it's got some of the freedom to it. It doesn't feel so strained, and you know, and I saw what you've done with the Bogeyman and John stuff as well, and it just I can't exactly remember how I came to you. I think you sort of, and then I saw you at
Lifeboat.
What's that, Steve?
Yeah, thanks. I mean,
Lifeboat.
Yeah,
Lifeboat. Well, yeah. So. Yeah, and like I say, I think, you know, Ben's been very supportive. You know, he's very responsive very quickly, which is great. You know, I mean, I'm a terribly impatient person. You know, it's one of my great failings. My son and wife will say, Jesus, just wait. Just be a bit patient.
I suddenly realized I sent you that question. The question was after about 10 days, 2 weeks of speaking to each other. In between, I had COVID and all sorts of things. I said, when's the deadline? And you gave me this deadline, and I'm like, well, I better get on with it. Like yesterday.
Yeah, well, you're very responsive and very tolerant of me badgering you constantly. So yeah,
that's okay. So we really need to talk about this Kickstarter, or more about the project itself and how is it going to kind of come together.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I'm very mindful that this is one of those meta circumstances where this is going to go out after the Kickstarter's probably started, and then it'll be on YouTube 20 years later after this Kickstarter went out, but it doesn't matter. So this Kickstarter was famous for making £1 million. It made £1 million during the month of August and September 2023. If you're looking from the year 2021, 23 or something, I don't know. But no, it starts this Wednesday, and we're going to do a show a bit like this, aren't we, Laurence? Aren't you getting all your friends? Are these two turning up?
I don't know. I thought you were organising it, Ben.
Steve, Paul, are you available Wednesday night?
Depends on what time.
Yeah. 8 o'clock.
I think it'd be quite nice for you to get somebody different in other than me, like David or Warwick.
Well, we've already Warwick on the show. No, we'll have anyone we can. Honestly,
yeah, he wants
Yeah,
everybody.
I'll need to check.
No, all it is just basically myself will be going through with. I'll be asking Laurence the questions. Laurence, what's on the Kickstarter? And he's going to show us all the rewards. So why don't we ask Steve, what are you doing for the Kickstarter rewards, Steve? Just to make sure I've got the information correct.
I'm doing 5 postcard sketches. Yeah.
And are they commissioned sketches, or are you telling us what's going to be on them?
No, they're commissioned. Yeah, people can choose.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. Which is pretty cool. And that's great. And I got that bit right. And Paul, before I, launch the Kickstarter, would you tell me what you've kindly offered?
I think it was 10 A5 sketches, black and white.
Yeah.
Subject matter, I don't know. I'm a bit fuzzy on all this Kickstarter stuff, actually.
Generally, what we do is, if you don't want to have to do, could I have a Chris Weston style 2000 AD cover with 120 characters on?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I will specify.
We usually do single character. We would ask for. We would say it's a single character commission. Yeah.
Definitely no crowd scenes.
Yeah, which is why Mick McMahon refused to continue to
horses.
do. Yeah, horses. Yeah, I want to. Exactly. There's a very, very famous. I think it's a Nigel Arctaluni cartoon, 3-panel strip, and he does it in such a beautiful little cartoony way. So the writer and the artist are at, I don't know, Space Blast comic convention, and there they are up on the plinth. They're giving and the writers going on about, I've got this scene at the beginning of the comic. He says it's great. Unlike films, there's no budget. We could have 100 ships coming out of hyperspace with 100 planets blowing up. And the artist looks at him. And the next panel goes, "I'll kill you." It's just like, there's no budget when it comes to cartoons, guys, is there? We can ask.
I remember my son looked at my description for the first page of Divided Saint, which was something like, there's 4 people on horses, 2 of them are robots. There's a robotic dog firing on several dragons through trees. And my son was like, who the hell is going to draw this for you?
Who did you get to draw it for you then, Laurence? Who did you get?
David Hitchcock did it. And I mean, I said to these guys as well, what's interesting about this experience is in my head, I've got a visual of what that looks like. And I think a really good sign, there's several double page spreads in the Divided Saint, and they're all a nightmare to draw. And I'm sure Paul's probably got a voodoo doll of me now and is stabbing at his feet. But,
I didn't think that was visible from where you were sitting.
You think it's a cat on his lap? It's not.
I can see it in your eyes. But for me, a really good sign is if the artist has eradicated what was in my mind's eye, and all those double page spreads, Warwick's, Paul's, David's. I can't remember what I had in my head when I wrote it visually, because it's been eradicated by the majesty of what they've created instead of it. So there's some impressive double page spreads in there. Really, really nice stuff. Sorry, Ben.
Seriously though, with regards to the difference between what a writer would write and what a comic book writer would script, is that the writer doesn't understand that things have to be split into panels which show a development. And often a writer puts in a sentence to do with, I don't know, they start standing by the window and then they turn around and turn the light on and then make a cup of tea. And the artist is going, that's about 10 panels right there.
I've had a few of those. Yeah.
But it's true though, isn't it? And I don't know. Come on, guys, you can dish the dirt. Did you have to get back to Laurence and say, come on, Laurence, you're going to have to. As a publisher, I have to.
Lawrence is actually quite non-prescriptive. He sort of throws it out there, which is a plus, but it also can be quite difficult. One of the strips I drew, Vitruvius. So in the strip, you've got this guy, this transhuman guy who's been built up as a living weapon, being tested, and it's like he moves, and he's in this lab, but there's 3 different armies coming at him at different times, and you've got to try and choreograph how he's going to move between these 3 different armies smoothly, doing different things, So but yeah, it's quite good working with Laurence in that sense. It's not too.
I do remember that one.
Quite
Yeah,
open. Yeah.
Stephen had a few pages where he's like, "You haven't really thought about the choreography of this fight, have you?" You know, I think the description was the guy falls on the floor backwards and blades shoot out of his arms and guns fire off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Guns come out of somewhere, and then he's diving and digging through the earth and rising up behind another army. So yeah.
I must admit, there were a few panels in that strip that I thought, I'm glad I didn't have to draw that. Just drawing somebody with 4 legs, I thought was difficult enough.
Yeah, that was
get that to work convincingly.
Yeah, that was tricky. Thank you, mate.
Yeah. No, I thought you did a great job of that.
Are you saying? Sorry, this is an exclusive, Paul. Are you saying you passed on that strip? Is that?
Oh no, it wasn't offered to me. It wasn't offered to me.
Yeah, that was
I think Lawrence's scripts were great. I mean, I do like a challenge to a point. You know, I think if I was writing stuff, it would be a really boring strip full of stuff that was easy to draw. So I do like something which kind of stretches me a bit. And Lawrence's script had a lot of unexpected imagery in it. It gets me drawing stuff that I wouldn't think of myself.
So just to say, we've covered the fact that both you fantastic artists have produced or will be producing these reward sketches. We've also got, what else have we got, Laurence? We've got David is producing some color work. I didn't know how many that was, by the way. We'll confirm later.
I think he is doing 2 A4 color pictures, both of the Divided Saint.
Wow, fantastic. Okay. And I think we will stick with your idea. Don't go changing it on the day now. You've said you've got 20, we call them ACEO cards, by the way, Laurence. I don't know if you knew that. The ACEO.
I did. The reason I did was because very happily Paul's one from This Comic is Haunted arrived just this very morning, which I was very excited about.
Excellent. And they're a standard 3.5 by 2.5 inch card, which all collectors would appreciate. They come. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I think what we will do, Laurence, is I think we will make a point that the first 20 backers will get one of yours. Whether they want it or not, they will get it.
Okay, I'm going to be first. I'm going to be there.
No one will sign up now.
Ben, why don't you tell people how they can find this Kickstarter campaign?
Well, they got to know the name of the comic, and it's WarFighter.
Yes.
We've gone unhyphenated, and it's all one word. So WarFighter, and that should get you there. There's a Facebook group of the same. There's a page the same. The 77 publications will be featuring it on Kickstarter. On Facebook as well. So we'll also drop a link, of course, in the comments here.
Yeah,
so there'll be a link in the comments there. That's right. And I suppose we really ought to talk about when it starts and when it ends.
Yeah, I think I have those dates and times. I'm gonna say it. It started, and remember, we probably are after releasing this after it starts, but it started on Wednesday, August 16th at 8 p.m. British summertime, and it's going to continue till Saturday, September 9th at 9:30 British summertime, 9:30 p.m. So that's quite a while. That's good time, enough time for people to get into this and support the Kickstarter campaign.
So Laurence, when can people, once I've fulfilled the Kickstarter and I'm doing this, the reason you've got me involved is because the 77, we have a knack of getting them out super quick. When can they see you in person with comics to buy them if they can't back you on the Kickstarter?
Well, I'm at the Bristol Comic Con, which is, I think, on the 9th of October. I think that's correct.
Ooh.
Could even be Saturday the 8th, but maybe I'm wrong as well. Let's just have a quick look.
You're probably right, Ben, and I'm probably
No,
right.
it's Saturday the 7th of October. If you're there on the 9th, there'll be no one there. But Saturday the 7th of October. And that, by the way, is by one of Comic Convention's legends is running this. I don't know if either Steve or Paul know of the old Bristol cons that used to come out.
I know of it. I've never been to
Mike Allwood and his Comic Cons. He's back around doing it again. Are you gonna be going, Paul? Do you think you might be able to make it?
I might do. I'm very tempted. I'm incredibly lazy when it comes to cons. I met you last year at one in Nottingham, and I think that might have been the first con I'd been to that year.
Well, we'll come up with someone in two people with a sedan chair. We'll come and pick you up and bring you down the M5 if you are. I think
that's fine by me. I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah.
And Steve, any chance we might see you? Or
no, not that early in September. September's fully booked.
October the 7th.
Oh, maybe October in Bristol. Yeah, maybe the October one. Then yeah. October should be good.
Because we're unfortunate we didn't see you in. I'm going to mention it now. We didn't see you in Laurence. Do you want to?
No, you didn't. No.
The show in a couple of weeks, and she'd be fascinated to know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't make Laurence last year. My own silly fault. Next year.
Bless. You're usually so good at these things. I do see.
I know. It's I just took my eye off the ball for 2 minutes, and it was all went pear shaped. Teach me.
Well, I'll put a good word in for you next year at Lawless.
Thank you. Cheers.
It's their 10th. It's their 10th anniversary. We keep talking about it, and maybe one year we'll get these guys over from the States.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
All right, let's steer a little bit away from WarFighter. I have a question for Paul. Paul, you've worked on both British and American comics. What do you feel the difference is, and which do you prefer?
I think the main difference seems to be American comics. The deadlines are a lot tighter. As Laurence will know, as Ben will know, I'm not fantastic with deadlines. But yeah, I think the last American strip I did was my one and only strip for Marvel. And I had like, it was working. I was getting like 4 hours sleep a night for the final week.
Right.
And as I've got older, I can't quite manage that any longer. But I think I'm lucky in the fact that I've worked with some really good people, both sides of the Atlantic. Some very patient people, some people I've earned a hell of a lot from, and some people who, editors who I'd like to consider friends now. I'm thinking of perhaps David Leitch from Titan. I kind of see him socially occasionally now. So sorry, I've wandered slightly off the question. The difference between the two. It's probably tightness of deadlines.
And which do you prefer working on? Regardless, let's say the timeline wasn't there. Let's say there wasn't deadlines. Which do you prefer?
I don't think I have a preference, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I mean, people sometimes say, is there a particular character you'd love to draw? And the only characters I can think of straight away are Judge Dredd and Howard the Duck.
Oh, Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck. Oh,
yes.
yeah. I used to read that back in the... that was a good
That was
comic.
a fantastic series.
Yeah.
There was nothing like it at the time.
Yeah. Did you read the magazine format they did after the comic that was in black and white? I think there were 9 issues, and they were for adults.
Right. I bought them all, but they're in my big pile of comics I have yet to read, sadly. But there was some fantastic artwork in those as well. I think Stephen said that when he was growing up, he would always gravitate towards the strips with the artwork, and that was me growing up as well. It didn't. I would quite happily read a terribly written strip that was beautifully illustrated. I'm a huge Mobius fan, and if I'm honest, I love the art. I like the stories are quite incomprehensible tosh. Really.
Yeah.
I may get strung up next time I can't say it. But it's the art, and Gene Colan's Howard the Duck was fantastic. So, what was the question again?
No, I think you answered it. You went on the M4, but you answered it. You're good.
We got there eventually.
Yeah, we got there. Vicky?
Well, I'm sorry. These guys are fun.
They are, aren't they?
Well, so Stephen, you are definitely known for your Judge Dredd. What
Yeah.
is it like drawing a character that has, shall we say, many hands have touched, and you have to put your own spin on him? How do you do that, and how do you make a character your own?
I still don't feel I have yet. I still I think I've done 3 Dread strips and probably 3 or 4 covers, and throughout all of them there's slight differences. I'm not happy with any of them, and it's like a work in progress. So yeah, I remember drawing a profile of Judge Dredd for somebody and put it on Facebook, and then Brian Bolland sort of reposted it with his drawing over it.
Oh, wow.
So he needs to make his bottom lip bigger.
That's nice. That's good.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so I'm getting there, but I haven't quite got him where I want him to be yet.
Do you mind if I ask a question, Stephen?
Yeah.
In terms of Judge Dredd artists, who do you think has been like the biggest influence on your version of Dredd?
Probably, I don't know.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Again, it's just, you know, it's just been a copying loads of different artists over the years. I suppose I always go back to Brian Bolland.
Yeah.
And also Steve Dillon. They're 2 that I really sort of copied a lot growing up, and I sort of go back to if I'm stuck on something I'm not sure. And Henry Flint as well. I'm nothing like him. I do like his style.
Yeah.
So I do sort of look at him sometimes. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Probably Brian's I go back to more often than not.
You know, the artist who I've warmed to, the older I've got though, and the one who I really was cold-shouldered when I was younger. I hated Ron Smith's Judge Dredd.
Oh, Ron Smith. Oh yeah, yeah.
But now I look at it and I just go, so much fun, so much. I call it kind of like he put so much bounce to the ounce. Do you know what I mean? The pictures are just full of fun and detail and silliness and things going on. And you can spend hours looking at his stuff.
He was actually the artist that I grew up with in the 80s, reading 2000. A lot of his stuff, because Brian had finished by then. He'd done his run. I started reading it. So I discovered Brian Bolland through The Killing Joke, and then I backtracked to his other stuff after that. So I missed his original run on 2000 AD.
I was going to ask you, Steve, why are you not happy with it? What is it that you think that
I don't know yet. I'm not
just
entirely
looking
sure.
at it and thinking this just doesn't.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Something just doesn't sit with me quite right. I'm not sure.
I think sometimes when you're very invested in a particular character, you never quite realise the ultimate version. I mean, I've drawn Graf Orlok lots of times. The closest I've ever come to capturing what it is I want to capture is one tiny little pencil doodle.
Yeah,
and I've blown that up and tried working on that. It's weird.
Yeah. There have been exactly that. There's been panels, or that's the one. But then trying to figure out what it is about that particular panel or that style that you can replicate again is very tricky. Yeah. I think the happiest I've been with was, sorry.
I mean, so much of Dredd's the helmet, isn't it? And
the happiest I've been is a cover I did for what was it? It was the I can't remember the story now. It's him standing in front of a burning megacity with the American flag behind him. Days of what was it?
Was that the one that got taken down after the after the storming of the White House?
Yeah, that's right. It was published the same week. And they written an apology or something.
Oh really? Oh god, there we go. An international.
I like that one.
Yeah, we got to see this. Not that we're,
we'll put it on the screen.
It's the happiest I've been with his face.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Is that the one that you used earlier for your avatar that popped up on the screen? Was that the avatar? Do you know what your avatar is?
Yeah, it may well have been actually. Yeah, may well have been.
Well, it's funny because I kind of see. You're going to disagree, but I kind of see Brendan McCarthy there a bit in terms of, I don't know, just some kind of. I know Brendan did the helmets, which are all dark shapes and stuff, but there's something about his kind of attitude that Brendan really got going, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's it.
Dylan's Dread always looked so clean cut. I didn't quite get it.
He did look quite clean cut.
He'd shaved and stuff. Whereas Brendan was like, this guy's been on the street 23 hours and 50 minutes today.
Yeah.
You know, he always felt he looked a bit worn out and a bit. I kind of like that.
Yeah,
but that's just a thing. I don't know. I saw the Steve Dillon exhibition at Lawless. Oh my days.
Yeah, I was gutted.
To actually stand, you know, that far away from the pictures, just phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow, the guy had talent. But there we go.
Can it be we're always our own worst critics?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I think most artists are. Absolutely. I think we all feel like imposters.
Yes.
Ooh, yes, the whole imposter syndrome. I didn't understand that until it's interesting that so many other people can relate to that as well.
Yeah.
But then again, it keeps us always striving and keeps us moving and keeps us
exactly.
motivated.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't believe that, you know, obviously you're bionic, so you can keep wrestling and you know, that's it, you know.
Or he's a wrestler, one or the other.
Yeah. Do you still hurl chairs at old ladies? Do you still do that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You jealous of The Rock?
Yeah.
Laurence, earlier this year you completed a Hedrick one-shot called Broken Pieces. Yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us a little about the creation of Hedrick, what the series is about, and does it really deserve the tagline Columbo meets the Wicker Man, which I totally want to read now because of that tagline.
Well, we're very lucky to get Stephen and Paul on that Broken Pieces issue as well. Both of these guys featuring there, Damien Edwardson as well, and Adam Jakes. So I mean, Hedrick comes out of my work with police officers. I mean, I'm not trying to get the fidelity of what happens in real law enforcement cases. I wanted to play into that kind of slightly out of the norm cop. You know, he's doesn't really fit in anywhere. He doesn't fit in the Cornish fishing town that he was brought up in. He doesn't really fit in as a cop. And actually, one of the things I really wanted to achieve is, if I look at any cop drama, the one thing that it is always let down by is terrible police interviewing. You know, you'll always get the police interviewer basically being a bully in the police interview. And I wanted to remediate that, because I know through the science that actually compassionate rapport-led interviewing is what gets results. This idea that you bully someone, coerce someone, or even manipulate someone isn't what works. All the science tells us that's bad. So, and you'll know this as well, Vicky. I can see you shaking your head in dismay. Actually, I mean, even programs like 24, you know, people that I know will tell you that those dramatic portrayals did have an influence on the enhanced interrogation tactics / torture that was used post 9/11. So we've got to get rid of that kind of ethos of you know, being... So
Laurence, are you saying that life then imitates art? So people see these characters behave in a certain way on TV, fictional scenarios, and then start behaving that way in real life?
No, I don't think that, but I think it legitimizes an approach that people already think is acceptable, that when you've got someone that you think or may suspect has been involved in some atrocity, that when the chips are down and you can't seem to get the information out any other way, we resort to these tactics that are vengeful and hateful and dehumanizing, and they're actually not necessary. Not only are they not necessary, not moral, and not legal, they don't actually work. So, I mean, there are surveys of populations where you say, you know, is it okay to beat up a terrorist? And lots of people will say, yeah. So I'm not saying it necessarily creates that environment, but it reinforces it or legitimizes it. So with Hedrick, I wanted him to be that sort of character that, in a way, his superpower was that he was compassionate, that he understood, didn't condone it, didn't accept it, and was still going to get people nicked and locked up, but understood where people were coming from. Right. So that was the genesis of that idea. And also I wanted to play into my love of folk horror. I'm a massive folk horror fan, and I knew that David Hitchcock was the go-to guy to do this very mystical, fairy tale like dark horror element of Hedrick. So big horror fan, big folk horror fan. You know, I know detectives. I mean, actually, just recently I'm working with a lovely guy called Carl Walsh, who's we're doing some pitches for TV scripts of Hedrick, and we've got some connections there. And there's I mean, who knows, these things often don't go anywhere, but you know, Carl sold to Netflix and Prime before, so I think it'd make a great show, you know, Hedrick TV.
Yeah, it sounds it.
So yeah, it's a issue 1 came out a couple of years ago now, and the final issue, David's completed all 30. There's another artist that wants to murder me. I read the script of that issue. Lots of mayhem in the last issue, and 38 pages of that have now been drawn, and that's ready to go. And I think kickstarting that in September. So yeah, it's complete. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad Hedrick's done. Whether he'll get any more adventures or whether I've killed him at the end of issue 4, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in answer to your Columbo thing, yeah, I think the nearest thing for me for a cop that I like the portrayal of narratively is Columbo. Sort of, he's got a bit of humility to him.
Yeah,
he comes across as a bit dithering, a bit odd, and a bit unorthodox, but actually gets the bad guy in the end and doesn't do it with force or manipulation. So yeah, Columbo, man. Yeah, I think that's a fair little strap line for it. Yeah.
How do you feel about the way profilers are portrayed on TV?
Don't even start me.
Oh,
Are they way off then?
Well, in the early 90s, a lot of my research was disabusing people of the myth of profilers. The whole idea that you could turn up at a crime scene and say it was organized or disorganized, complete bullshit. So I did a lot of research in the early 90s about how that was wrong and muddled.
Don't mention Paul Britton.
Oh, don't even mention him, Stephen. That's a dirty word. Yeah, I provided the defense for Colin Stagg back in 1992 on the Rachel Nickel murder inquiry. And, a lot of the reason that went wrong was because of poor advice from a psychologist. So I got the reputation in the courts as being known as the hatchet man, because I would look at other psychological reports and just sigh through them, basically, cut through the bullshit and, give an indication of what was and was not possible. I mean, that said, profiling's moved on since then, but the idea of this kind of, guy or
magic wands.
Yeah, just complete nonsense and hugely problematic, actually. But hopefully the dark old days of the sort of those profilers is long ago. I had the good fortune to meet Robert Ressler, and who wrote the Whoever Fights Monsters book, and Hazelwood as well. And I mean, actually, I don't know if you've watched Mindhunter, the Netflix.
Oh, that's good series.
Yeah, it's not bad, actually. I've met Douglas, and it is a fairly interesting and relatively accurate portrayal of what went on there. But as a sort of scientific approach, or it's just nonsense. But yeah, I liked Mindhunter quite a bit. Yeah, it was good. Sorry, I wandered a bit there. Was that good?
That was great.
That's great. Steve, you got to work on Paul Goodenough's Rewriting Extinction book. Now, we've had Paul on the radio show, and we've actually asked people this question before. Are you part of the problem or the solution?
Probably part of the problem, but probably less than I would have been before I met my other half, who's very much part of the solution.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit more cautious with lights and recycling and etc. than I used to be. Yeah.
All right, Vicky.
That's it. Put me on the spot.
Yeah, keep putting her on the spot.
I'm sorry. I'm having too much enjoy watching and listening, and now I got to think again.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks all. Okay. What have I not asked you guys yet? Well, here, since we're getting towards the end of it, why don't I ask? I'll start with Paul. Paul, what is next for you? What are you working on now, and what can we expect to see next from you?
Right. There's a comic that was kickstarted last year, a couple of years ago. It's been re-kickstarted, called First Men on Mars. So it's a steampunky thing. I'm doing a few pages for that. I'm doing a steampunk comic called The Periwinkle Perspective, The Poison Chalice.
Okay.
And there's some other things. You put me on the spot now. I can't remember.
The other one, start thinking.
Hopefully, I've worked with a writer called Levi Tidar, the award-winning Levi Tidar, as I like to call him. He's written a really good sci-fi horror strip, Jupiter Dreaming, which hopefully, when I've got some space, I'll be able to get stuck into. But when that'll be, I think he wrote that just over a year ago, and I'm hoping I'll maybe start it in January. But that's it for me. Over to somebody else.
Stephen, what are you working on next?
Oh, a lot less than Paul. I'm at the moment. I'm just roughing out pages for a Devlin Wall story.
Ooh, yeah. Oh,
yeah. So that should be out, I've been told, early next year.
okay.
So I've just finished roughing out the first 12 pages. There's 24 pages.
Oh wow.
Well, I am slightly jealous of that, Stephen, I must admit.
So yeah, and that's it really. I don't have. I've got 3 kids now, so my time on being able to work is sort of staggered over the course of the day. I get 6.5 hours in the day and then 3 hours in the evening, and so it's yeah. So
But you're working part-time now, are you, Stephen?
I've been yeah, kind of.
Oh no, it's great when they're adults and they don't live here anymore and they're all gone.
Yeah.
So let me tell you,
I've got a while to go yet.
mine's all grown up and
3.
gone. So
I think Laurence is next. Is last.
yes, Laurence, what are you working
on?
next?
Thank you. I totally missed that one.
I've done another 34-pager that David started today called Out There, which is a young adult thing. I mean, hopefully leaning towards the female market as well. It sounds a bit dark. It's about depression and social isolation and anxiety, but actually it's a sort of sci-fi allegory. I've described that as a cross between Halo Jones and Dora the Explorer. So David's on that at the moment. And
I don't know. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. He's doing a nice job on it. And then I've also got a short piece with Warwick Fraser-Coombe that I'm still tweaking at the moment. And I'm not quite sure where either of those will appear. I'll probably buy the Ben again to try and get those published at some point in time. But yeah, scripts are written and art's commencing. I've got a few other bits and pieces here and there, but those are the main things that are sort of preoccupying me at the moment. Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Ben, let's ask your final question.
So my last question, no, it's not. It's going to be basically we've got only a couple of days until the Kickstarter begins. I've got question is to myself is how am I going to fit everything in? Let me see, we've got the printer's been in touch today about the Bogeyman dropping in the next week and a half, and I've got to go over to John Wagner's house to collect the signed copies, meet Mike Perkins, which is going to be fantastic, and Robin Smith. And then, yeah, I shipped all of the artwork out for the wonderful backers who bought lifeboat pages. That was a pleasure and a terrifying thing to do. So here's my question to either Paul or to Stephen. How do you wrap expensive artwork? Come on, when you're posting it, and I can see if I did a good job or not.
I've never sent any expensive artwork anywhere. My artwork's not worth a lot.
Oh,
I would disagree.
Don't say that. That's no.
Oh, guys, I didn't mean to do that. So, all right. So that's me this week, and yeah, well, guys, I mean, thanks so much, and hopefully speaking to you in a couple of days, and you know, this will be a conversation we'll have in a couple of days and say how successful the launch for Laurence's next book is.
I got a question. Not a question. I want everyone to have a final word. So, Laurence, do you have anything you want to let everyone know?
Well, yeah, I mean, check out the Kickstarter. There's some wonderful art in it. We've been very lucky to secure these guys to provide some original art as well, which I'm just hugely grateful for. And you know, as with all these things, it's very easy to just buy some of these indie comics. I mean, I think the indie comics market's thriving at the moment. I actually find it much more exciting than anything else that's going on anywhere else to some extent. And yeah, give us some feedback. It's always, you know, Hedrick's been around for a while now. I'd like to know what people think of it. I'd like to know what we could do better. And the same with WarFighter. Let us know what you think of it. Let us know what you liked. And, you know, if there's an appetite for it, you might be able to construct something similar again next year.
All right. Paul?
Well, I'm proud to have been involved in both Hedrick Broken Pieces and Warfighter. I think they're quite distinctive comics, from each other and from everything else that's out there at the moment. I feel as though I've done some. Yeah, I was going to say some of my best stuff. That's not really for me to say, but I feel I've done some of my stuff about which I'm least embarrassed for both of those stuff.
And Stephen.
I'll just back the Warfire as well. I've done 3 strips. Thoroughly enjoyed them. I think you'll see, especially with Vitruvius, the struggle that went into it. And I was really pleased with the outcome. It's a pleasure working with Laurence as always. And it's a comic with a message. Well, I don't know about message. Like I sort of saw the stories as fables. They all had a, as Laurence mentioned earlier, they were written with psychology in mind, or the psychology of war in mind, etc. And that sort of really shows through. So it's an interesting comic as well.
All right. Before we leave, Ben, let's do some housekeeping. Go ahead.
Well, the 77 publications available from 77comic.net. We're on Facebook with the 77 Comic, and all our titles have their own little pages. Thanks very much. And the exit is that way, I think, isn't it?
let me do some housekeeping too. So Vicky and I do the show MarkWHO42. MarkWHO42's universe. Our website is MarkWHO42.com. We air on Subspace Radio Network about 5 to 7 times a week. And you can find that at www.subspace.radio. We also have our extended podcast everywhere around the world and the net. You can find it. It's called the MarkWHO42's Universe podcast. A little different than MarkWHO42's Universe. You got to do the whole 4 words to get the extended one. All right. Let me say thank you to all our guests, Laurence, Paul, and Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being lovely hosts as well. Thank you.
Let me give a special thanks to Lestat Luchalibre for doing our title sequence. Thank you, Lestat. Anything else you want to say, Vicky or Ben?
No, this is just a great day. Thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
All right, so everyone, join us the next time for another interview, but bye.
Have a great night. Yeah, bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.